Okay, as usual, the typical sound check. Let me just see. Mm-hmm.
Washington Post.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Alrighty then, excellent. Now, once again, I'm going to try and see if I can do Jedi Outcast this time, because I had to go out to adjust the volume, and that was kind of what caused, I think, Streamlabs to go kind of screwy. It doesn't like it when you try to leave behind the game screen. So let's just see if we can avoid that, and thus finally have something else to look at apart from Risk of Rain 2. But yeah, we are now in the final stretch of Marvel Star Wars 1977. And once again, for anyone who wishes to follow along, link in the description to a website where you can follow the comic along for the most part. Now then, yes, here we are. And yeah, we're pretty much, and yeah, like I said, we are in the home stretch, as it were. We've only got 2 more to go, including this one. Okay. Now because the stream is a few seconds slow behind me. Let's see if it shows. Drat! It's still only the tiny scream. And here I was hoping for variety. Fine. Let me just get that everything set up the way I like it, and then we will get this thing going. So anyway, like I said, link in the description to the website. We're starting on chapter 87. So we are within 20 chapters, give or take a few bonus annual issues from the conclusion. And I'm actually kind of surprised that I've made it this far, because I was honestly expecting it to this to continue into at least the first week of January. And I've still got, I'm almost done with all the recording for the latest round of L5R lore videos. Because that's the longest thing to take care of. So I'm hoping that that's still going. And of course, still working on the comic project, as well as writing letters of introduction to literary agents. So that, because clearly I've learned at this point that I'm just not good at advertising myself, so I'm going to have to find someone to do that for me and pay them for the privilege. Not enough for smooth streaming, huh? Still says it's fine. And the screen's still operating fine. But okay. Let me just set up. Now, recalling the last stream, Luke basically went back to Iskalon, the water planet, as part of a diplomatic mission. With the Empire gone, there's now this big push for the rebels to try and, well, the former rebels, they now call themselves the Alliance of Free Planets, to essentially invite a bunch of people to join the new intergalactic government. Yeah. And of course, Luke volunteered for one, went to Iskalon, and where he had a run-in with some of the recurring characters from previously. The con man Rick Duel and his 2 partners, Chido the Rhodian and Danny the Zeltron. Also, one of the Escalonians, Kiro, who was a bit more outward-looking than the rest of his very insular kind, who have been very withdrawn ever since the Empire nearly genocided their race, has decided to accompany Luke. So, at any rate, things are starting to get interesting, and because we're picking up essentially where that left off. Again, most of the and a lot of the later comic run, a lot of the stories are sort of self-contained and like one or two off in themselves, but they are generally connected by they have sort of like a narrative connective tissue of wider events. And again, in this case, it's sort of the early years of the post-Endor galaxy, where the Alliance is trying to reestablish essentially the old Republic, at least in accordance with its old ideals, not the corrupt form that, especially according to the prequel era, that it eventually became, and thus becoming the Empire. And so their mission. And so basically, Luke brought Rick, Danny, and Chido along, mostly just so that he can keep an eye on them, because he found them trying to steal stuff from the wreckage of some places on Iskalon, and he figured, I can't really let these guys out of my sight. Right. So it's not exactly that he wants them along; it's just he doesn't feel he has much of a choice. And of course, so he has to take them along on his first diplomatic mission to this world called Shawken. But of course, just as Luke fears, Rick is very much out for himself, and once he gets down, and some of the locals mention old abandoned ruins from the ancient past on Shawken that might hold. He immediately starts thinking, well, maybe there are like valuable artifacts that I can nab and sell for my own profit. So, is very typical behavior. Meanwhile, Luke is trying to establish, along with Pliff, the Hoojib, are mostly trying to establish good relations with the leadership on Shawken. And so far it's going well. The people are very friendly. And of course, Luke pitches the offer of, hey, would you like to maybe join and play a role in the new government? We would like to give everybody a voice, essentially. Unfortunately, while all this is going on, Kiro decides to follow Rick because, obviously, and rather sensibly, the Escalonian doesn't trust this trio of smugglers and con artists any further than he could throw them. And indeed, he catches the trio right as they are busy trying to pry some, I'm guessing, priceless works of art from the wall, or at least what seems to be that way. He gets into a scuffle, and this basically activates a booby trap, because of course these old places are booby traps. It's very classic stuff. And here is kind of where this particular storyline gets more than a little silly, because they just really decide, I don't know why, but the writers decided to just really up the stakes for this. What do I mean by up the stakes? Well, eventually, of course, Luke and the Shawkenese people show up and to extricate Rick and co. from the mess they led themselves into. And it turns out that the artistic murals are actually part of a mechanism for an ancient doomsday device. Once again, we have this sort of thing where, the Shawkenese were once ridiculously advanced technologically. Annoying. And among the many, many crazy things they developed was essentially a doomsday weapon that would cause planets to just keep smashing into each other like a giant ricochet thing, if you've ever played billiards, or if you want to call it pool. Basically, each planet would just smash into the next and keep on going and going in a chain reaction until everything in the universe was destroyed. It's just as cartoonish as it sounds. And that really is kind of the downside to this story, because even for Star Wars, which is again avowedly science fantasy, there are just some things where it just feels way too stupid and like ridiculous, even for science fantasy. You know, and that kind of is the problem with science science fantasy. As much as it is fantastical, it is still technically science fiction, and as such, there has to be an element of believability to it. That straight up fantasy just doesn't have to worry about most of the time. But of course, you know, the heroes manage to stop the doomsday weapon from going off. And this is mostly because they have to go to a place that's flooded. And of course, none of the air breathers can go there, but Kiro's from a water planet, and so he goes down there and uses Luke's lightsaber to destroy the mechanisms of the doomsday device. Of course, he gets severely injured, and it's left kind of a bit ambiguous as to whether he made it. But of course, it soon turns out that yes, the kid has survived. Right. A bit of an interesting detail is around this time where, you know, after Luke has been constantly putting her off ever since they met, Danny, it seems, is finally starting to give up on, you know, pursuing Luke romantically, because again, in early 70s, Zeltrons are not just empaths like the Betazoids. They are, as I like to say, the closest Star Wars ever gets to being horny on main. And apparently she's now switching her attentions to Kiro. Bit of a relief for Luke, I'm sure. Apparently he's not really into very forward women. And so we move on to chapter number 88. And this is getting a little interesting because, especially for people who are familiar with certain aspects of the expanded universe, particularly post the Yuuzhan Vong Wars, the New Jedi, as in like the New Jedi Order book series, we have technically the debut of a character who becomes very significant in the post New Jedi Order Star Wars continuity. Although, of course, technically we've met her before, we just don't know it yet. And it is kind of interesting, again, especially these later parts of the series, these things that would later end up being brought back, even though most of the comic series would be, even like before Disney, be sort of retconned out of being canon by later Star Wars material. But I'm getting ahead, but enough foreshadowing. So, of course, you know, we're still on the theme of the rebels, the Alliance, I should say, get my terminology right, on their diplomatic missions to get people to join the new, you know, free government. And I just have to wonder at what point they started calling themselves the New Republic. Okay, so this time it's Leia, Mon Mothma, and 3PO on this one. And we are... Dang it, what is the name of this planet? I could remember Shoxon, but not this one. Herdessa, that's it. It's a human planet, and of course, to much to the surprise of Mon Mothma and Leia, the reception is not a very warm one. Like a lot of the planet's leaders are happy to see them. But there's also more than a few hecklers among the crowd who are clearly not. In fact, one of them someone in the crowd actually throws a dirt clod into Leia's face. You know, luckily it doesn't hurt. She's just dirty and embarrassed, as she puts it. And one of the leaders of Herdessa, a cyborg named Lumia, basically sicks some of the local security officers after the miscreant, as it were. Leia is understandably a little bemused by all of this, given this and how this vitriol on the part of some of the population contrasts sharply with the authority on Herdessa, which is essentially a guild. And they very much they're very much all about making reassuring, and they make all these reassuring noises about, oh yes, 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 we are going to do all these things and come to arrangements with the Alliance that are good and profitable for us. Of course, Leia is still more interested in why some of the inhabitants of Herdessa are so hostile. And at what point, while she's musing about this, she stumbles onto Lumia, who's managed to grab one of the people who threw the one that threw the mud clod at her. Apparently, the other's been taken into custody. And of course, Leia tries to intervene because, she figures just a ball of mud to the face doesn't exactly warrant a death sentence. But it seems Lumia is not the reasonable type. And basically is just and so Leia ends up having to use violence on the cyborg. Luckily, Leia knows a thing or two about fighting. All those years in the Alliance certainly paid off. And she basically chases after the urchin. Her name is Suzu. Her boyfriend Finn was the one that the security forces caught. And of course, no matter how Leia tries to, tries to open a dialogue with her, Suzu, it seems, is just totally of the mindset that Leia is not to be trusted, that she's no different than the leaders of Herdessa. And it turns out the leaders of Herdessa are so wealthy because they're big in the slave trade. Mon Mothma, in fact, discovers this right around the time that the guild leaders of Herdessa decide that, we don't like this. We're not exactly keen on this freedom and equality stuff you Alliance types are going on about. So, in fact, we're probably just going to, sell you and the princess into slavery. So yeah, things are not exactly looking good. Luckily, Leia is finally able to get the local rebels, I should say, to accept her, mostly because they don't have much of a choice. Lumia is bringing the full force of local security down on their heads, and there's a big fight. And in the end, they, of course, the good guys win because it's a short story. Because again, it's a short one-issue thing. There's not much room to do a bigger, more expansive storyline. And so they were going to hand them over to the Empire, but they managed to beat them, and that's pretty much it. The local rebels have learned to see that Leia and the Alliance of Free Planets are not the same as their former overlords, and that maybe working with the Alliance might be worth their while. However, Lumia has escaped, and she's very much determined. And the last scene is her swearing vengeance. It kind of makes me wonder, because I don't think at this point they might not have yet decided to do with Lumia what they did, what the comic would end up doing with her. And it is sort of interesting. I don't know if anybody knows if there anything that confirms or denies this supposition that at this point they were still unsure of what they were going to do with this particular character. But she is coming back. This is not the last we have seen of her. Give me a second. And so, okay. Now we move on to number 89. Damn it. And, once again, we're on the same theme of the Alliance helping out other worlds in the struggle for worlds. This time, though, it's sort of to help them still regain the struggle for freedom, because, just because the Empire is gone doesn't mean that it's it's not gone. It's basically been beaten, but it's not out. They're down, but they're not out. And let's see, what's the name of this particular planet? Okay, so Chapter 89 opens up with Luke helping the local rebellion make a final push for freedom on the world of Soleil, because their local king is basically an imperial lackey. However, in the final moments of victory, the leader of the local rebels, Ragold, is killed, and it's suspected that foul play, that one of their own side shot him, a fellow rebel. And indeed, as he dies, Ragold, when Luke asks the dying man who killed him, he says only, "A traitor of the vilest kind imaginable, one from our own ranks," and then that's that. So Luke is this one is kind of a weird one, and it's not all that good. There are a lot of good elements to it, but the main plot line, which is mostly revolving around Luke's search for the traitor and what seems to be a budding romance with one of the other rebels, Mary, I believe. It's just not handled all that well. Though the mystery is certainly pretty good, but I don't think it's handled as well as it could have been in terms of pacing and of the kind of development, because Luke kind of seems to waffle back and forth between this weird desire for revenge and being all googly-eyed for Mary. Of course, in the aftermath, as the search for the traitor unfolds, it turns out things are quite interesting, is what I would say, on Soleil. And basically the idea is that the rebellion is but one of many, and it's kind of farce, and in many ways it's a farce. There have always been multiple rebellious factions, and that the Empire has kind of been doing this for a long time. Whenever they feel that the local king of Soleil has outlived his usefulness, they will actually help sponsor a rebellion to overthrow him, and then they'll basically get the new king into their pocket. And the king is this, darn it, what is his name? Blackart. Not the most imaginative name, but all right. Blackart. And Soleil is a very diverse population. There's humans and a bunch of aliens, and Blackart is just this big, hulking red ogre with half of his face is metal. He kind of looks like a red Warhammer orc. Just his ears aren't nearly pointy enough, and he isn't green. And what's more, it's not just, as Luke looks for clues, he notices that the rebels on Soleil aren't exactly acting very rationally with their new freedom. They're just using it as it seems that a lot of them have just used it as an excuse to pillage and just steal stuff for themselves. There's not a lot of idealism in this rebellion. But eventually, with the help of a street urchin who basically, which is clearly an Oliver Twist reference, because they have him and a bunch of other small children stealing stuff for this other guy whom they refer to as their father, but clearly fills in the role of a Fagin type figure. He just uses them to get stuff, and he berates them for not stealing enough stuff. Excuse me. And so it's certainly kind of disheartening for Luke. And then the big thing, though, is that eventually the Empire arrives to help put down the rebellion. And because sometimes sometimes they will put them down, sometimes they'll let them run their course. But this time they decided, Blackheart's might be still useful to them, so they're coming in to, well, maybe not so much put him down as, restore their own control and put a new king in charge. And in fact, Blackheart admits as much to Luke, that he figures that he's no longer much use to his imperial masters, and that he's dead as the rest of them on Soleil. Hang on. So at last, though, Luke does figure out the truth from this weird-looking alien information broker, or by the name of Braxis. He kind of looks like E.T. If he's like the unholy love child of E.T. and the Grinch. He's basically got a similar body shape to E.T., albeit like his lower half is inside of a wheeled conveyance. But at the same time, he's all hairy like the Grinch in like the Dr. Seuss books. It's a very weird, design. But anyway, he sort of ends up revealing the truth in exchange for Luke getting him off of Soleil, because he knows the Empire's coming, and he figures that this might be a good time to make tracks. And he even puts Luke through this very weird test where he has to grab food with chopsticks out of a bowl of scorpions. It's very bizarre. Very bizarre. But at any rate, the truth is that in fact the traitor was Raggold. That he had basically been an Imperial dupe. Well, no, not a dupe. He was literally a collaborator. He had fomented the rebellion deliberately, because the Empire wanted to get rid of what was deciding they were done with black art. However, in sort of the classic story of the liar going undercover, Raggold came to sympathize with the rebels and hate himself for being an Imperial collaborator, and so he decided to kill himself in the moment of the rebels' victory as a kind of recompense for what he had done. And now he will be remembered not as a traitor, but as the hero that he ultimately has become. It's certainly a sobering revelation for Luke. But of course, even with all this stuff, there's nothing he can do to stop the Empire from reinvading Soleil. So it does end on a dour note. But of course, he honors the promise to Braxa. Darn it. No, what's his name? To Braxess. That's it, Braxess. I almost said Braxar because I was getting mixed up with the big ogre king guy. And it ends with Luke, taking him off world as he agreed. And I can see what they were going for, and it is certainly interesting to have that sort of kind of a downer story like this. But once again, because they only have the one chapter, and they don't handle it as well as they could have. Because you can see how this story could be done very, very well, especially if they had more time to cook the plot, as it were. And with that, we move on to issue number 90. So we're sort of so again, we're picking up immediately afterwards. Both Luke and Leia return from their respective missions, and Leia is less than thrilled to see Rick, Chido, and Danny back. Apparently because after the this, as well as that time where she ended up having to disguise herself as a singer on Kebre Station, has really almost become like a kind of Tourette's thing, where she just really has a hard time tolerating Zeltrons. And there's sort of a bit of a running gag where a couple of other characters remark on this, I've never heard of someone who didn't like a Zeltron, because again, Zeltrons are basically the sexy green skin people of the Star Wars setting in that way. In that sense, again, paralleling Star Trek, they're kind of like the Orions. anyway, another issue at hand is that, and this is kind of an interesting one, and it's kind of contradicts what they do with Leia a lot later in the expanded universe, where Leia basically says to Luke that she's having a hard time adjusting to back to diplomacy after spending so long fighting the Empire. She says at one point that she's worried that she's gotten a taste for action, and she no longer has the kind of patience that diplomacy often requires anymore. Which is again kind of weird, especially as someone who's mostly familiar with Leia's post-Endor storyline through later expanded universe material, where she's pretty much the diplomatic person. She even goes on to be, I think the office was Chancellor of the New Republic at one point. But this is not real. But this one doesn't really have much of a plot to it. It's very low key, and it's sort of almost like a respite between major events. Though they are setting up a few things. One, obviously, they're sort of confirming that Rick, and especially Rick Chido, and especially Danny, are here to stay as significant characters. Although in the case of Rick and Chido, they mostly disappear around this time. Danny sticks around and becomes quite important. There's also the fact that they also set up the idea of Luke being very reluctant to train others in the ways of the Jedi, because he just isn't confident enough in his abilities as a teacher. And this is actually something that is consistent, that unlike with Leia, is actually consistent with the later expanded universe stuff. One of Luke's big character dilemmas over the course of, say, the Thrawn trilogy, the first one, I mean, is that he's worried that he might fail the next generation, the new generation of Jedi, the same way that Obi-Wan and Yoda failed Darth Vader. And so at one point, when Kiro reveals that he might have destroyed that weird cosmic annihilator thing on Shawkin by tapping into the Force, he asks Luke to train him as a Jedi, and Luke refuses, and Kiro doesn't take it very well. By now, they've managed to recover. He's managed to recover from the wounds that he sustained on Shawkin, but again, and he's kind of let down by Luke's refusal to train him. Meanwhile, the Alliance leadership is basically meeting with all those delegates that did decide to answer the call to become part of the new government. And at one point, because Luke, Han, and Leia are distracted by a scuffle between Rick and some rebel pilots who think that he cheated them. And again, there's nothing that confirms that it was one way or another. And in fact, Kiro takes Rick's side, saying that Rick would actually was the kind of guy who would boast about how he suckered people, that he wouldn't hide it. So who knows? Maybe Rick was playing fair, and the rebels are just being sore. But it escalates into violence, and Chido suffers a blaster injury, though he does recover. And because of this, they miss the meeting, and Mon Mothma and Akbar decide that by their absence, our main cast of Star Wars characters are sort of going to be left out of the actual running of the new Free Alliance government. So again, like Chapter 91, not Chapter 90, I should say, is more of an in-between sort of thing, as well as partially a setup for what might come later. And in speaking of setup, we now come to Chapter 91, where at last, Chewie finally gets to go home to Kashyyyk and see his family, and of course, Han and Lando accompany him. Unfortunately, things are not very great on Kashyyyk. Let me first look this up, because I want to make sure I've got this right. Sorry about this, guys. Hang on. Okay. Now I've got it. Whoop. Oops, hold on. Getting something funny here. Okay, never mind. Something looked funny in the feed for a moment there. So anyway, and again, this is something that is sort of that they do carry through over, is that the Empire, during its rule, Kashyyyk was mostly a place where they would have Wookiees exported off-world as slaves. Because, you know, the Empire is evil, and, you know, the bad guys always got to be involved in slavery somehow. And however, even though the Empire's out of the picture, it would seem that some folks are trying to revive the slave trade, and there are even Wookiees that are willing to collaborate with these people. The main bad guy this time is a weird, pale-looking fella by the name, whose name, he says his name is unpronounceable, and so he goes by the name of Knife. Knife, a name that was given to him by the Wookiees. You know, or at least their equivalent in Shriwook. Yes. And he's basically working with Chewie's brother-in-law, Vargi, to revive the Wookiee slave trade, only, though initially Han thinks it's for the Empire, Vargi makes it Knife makes it clear that he's got his own agenda, and that he's working for somebody else. And they've even basically taken Chewbacca's wife, son, and father hostage. So, so for the time being, the bad guys have all the cards. Han and Lando are sort of, well, yeah. Knife is a very weird guy. He is his name suits him because he's very good with a throwing blade. Like, he literally pins a beetle to a wall in one scene. But luckily, Han is able to free Chewie, and Lando is able to free Chewie's family. So now that his family is no longer hostage, Chewbacca can just let loose and beat Vargi to a pulp for his crimes. Because, you know, Wookiees, in one, they're a proud people, and two, they really have learned to hate slavery and those who are involved in it. But again, this is not the first time. Well, this is technically the first time in the history of the Star Wars media that we've seen Wookiees collaborating in the slave trade. But, you know, for my Star Wars series, or should this be canon series, this isn't the first time we've seen this, because in KOTOR, sort of one of the big plot lines is, you know, Zalbar's brother, one of the companion characters in KOTOR 1, was also a Wookiee that collaborated with the Sith, only this time with the Sith Empire, in order to enslave his own people for his personal gain. Knife, of course, escapes, but as it turns out, once again, this is a setup, though we don't know it at the time, but it isn't the last we hear of Knife or his people, even though we have yet to learn anything about them. Hold on. Come on. Okay, next up, Chapter 92. So, this one's a bit interesting, though it's more of an internal, though the conflict is more internal, because here, Luke spends a lot of it struggling with a nightmare at first. He's seemingly pursued by Darth Vader, and for whatever reason, Luke is overcome with fear. And especially, he is fearful of Vader removing his helmet for some reason. But, you know, he snaps out of it in time. So now, and it's just as well because we have a new arrival on Endor, where the rebels, it seemed, have sort of transitioned their permanent base there, following the destruction of the second Death Star. This young man who calls himself, was it Devon or Denon? Hang on. Denin, yes, that's it. He says that he's from this planet called Naldar. And he's basically come to petition the Alliance for help because the Empire is still running roughshod over his world. He's not, given that he's, coming as a suppliant to the Alliance, he is not exactly very courteous about it. He's very rude to everybody and basically just makes demands as if he were the one in charge. And this kind of ruffles Leia's feathers. And especially and there's also the fact that Denin sort of puts on this very self-pitying act where he sort of goes off in the "how can you understand the suffering of my world?" And Leia basically has to inform him point blank that, her planet was completely destroyed by the Empire. It's also here where we have sort of a minor side character from the Rebellion, and I believe his name is it Barley or Barney? Let me quickly check. Yeah, hang on. Darn it. Yeah, it is Barney. Huh. Kind of an odd name, but then again, we have characters named Luke. So, what's it called on TV tropes? The trope Aerith and Bob. Where, you'll have settings with some ordinary names and some fantastical sounding names. And it turns out that this sort of issue, the story of issue 92 ties into one of the annual issues that are technically not part of the main 107 chapters of Marvel Star Wars 1977, but were sort of done like one, because they were an annual issue. There were 3 of them done at one point, like in the early part of the series, like once a year they would do like an extra special chapter. And unfortunately, the website where I mostly read the comics, I didn't have the annual issues. I had to find them elsewhere, and so I'm not going to be able to cover the annual issues and how they connect to this chapter until the next to last stream, the next stream, which will be the last one, which I'm hoping is going to be on Saturday. And basically, because there's a connection between Barney and one of the main antagonists of the chapter, though we'll get to him in a moment. We once again sort of reiterate the theme of Luke's reluctance to take on students because we have several, because Luke is helping train rebel pilots, and several of them ask, well, hey, you're the Jedi, when are you going to teach us your tricks? And again, Luke has to reiterate his reluctance to do so and why he feels that he isn't fit to teach them. And again, once he arrives, Denin demands, because again, he's not very polite about this, he demands training, and again, Luke refuses, and as you might expect, he doesn't take that very well. Denin doesn't take a lot of things very well in this story. But at last, Luke does manage to finally solve the riddle of his vision. Because it turns out, because he gets a brief visitation from the ghosts of Yoda and Obi-Wan. And they reveal that the mysterious figure chasing him is not, in fact, Vader. It just looked like Vader because that was how Luke's mind chose to perceive it. But in fact, it's another Dark Lord in very ornate armor. And it's in fact an antagonist that originally appeared in one of the annual issues, a man named Flint. And so basically he's the enemy they have to deal with now. And so they head to Naldar at last, because Denin does finally get his way. The Alliance decides to send at least a small force to see if there's anything to be done on Naldar. Unfortunately, by now, the planet's been effectively blasted to oblivion. In fact, and they find nothing but ruins, and most everyone is dead. And of course, because as you might expect, because it's the Falcon, it has some technical problems. And while some hunt among the ruins for clues, others are basically looking for spare parts. In this case, it's Han. Well, no, Han and Chewie stay with the ship. Luke and Lando go with Denon to see if they can connect with any of the rebels on Naldar, while Leia and the droids look for parts. What's this? Ooh. Yes, Willem Burgle. Yeah, I do get sort of the impression that is kind of the theme that that particular chapter was trying to push. But yeah, it's just not handled particularly well. Oh, but anyway, while looking for parts to get the Falcon up and running, Leia and the droids discover that Prince Denon because I forgot, yeah, because I don't know if I mentioned earlier, but it was sort of a monarchy on Naldar. But yeah, Prince Denon has been dead for a long time. In fact, what was it? Yes, in fact, Denon is in reality Denon's sister, Villa, who has kind of assumed his identity in order to lead her people against the Empire. And pretty much, this does sort of ring a degree of sympathy for Villa, because again, unfortunately, because she only appears in the one chapter. There's not a lot of development for her, and again, because she's pretending to be someone else, there is not enough time to get a grip on who she is and identify with her in this regard. But the story is well written enough to wring some sympathy for her, because all this time she's literally been living this false life as her brother. Or she's had to basically act as he would act, say things that he would say. In fact, the only reason why she asked Luke to train her in the Force is because one of her brother's great dreams was to become a Jedi Knight. And in the end, she has this very sad moment where she basically says, "I don't know what I want anymore." And it is done well enough that even though she doesn't have much development, you do feel sympathy for her. Someone who has had to live this identity that is not her own all this time because it was what her people needed her to be. Unfortunately, she couldn't do that by being herself. And in fact, she's pretended to be her brother for so long. As she says, she doesn't know what she wants, what her own aspirations are. And I really do wish that this particular storyline could have been expanded more and explored more, because there was a lot of great potential ideas here. But anyway, as revealed earlier, Flint, the man that at one point also wished to learn the ways of the Jedi, but was also rebuffed by Luke. Because again, I'm sure it's talked about in the annual issue that he makes his debut in, but again, for whatever reason, the annuals are just not normally collected with the main series. Hopefully I'll be able. I've been able to find a site where they are on, but I'm gonna have to cover those in the next stream. But the rebellion failed to save his world from being destroyed, and in bitterness, Flint turned to the Empire. And basically allowed Vader to manipulate him into being his apprentice in a way. And in fact, it's interesting because during the final part of the vision, Luke, when he realizes the identity of that the identity of the man he fears in his dream vision isn't Darth Vader but Flint, the ghost of Anakin Skywalker appears to him and says, "In some ways, we are both responsible for what happened to Flint, but alas, I am no longer able to undo what I have done." And so it seems that apparently Luke feels his own share of the guilt for at least what happened to Flint's world, if not for what happened to Flint himself. But in fact, it's not Luke that manages to get through to Flint that, like, what the hell are you doing siding with the people who screwed up your own world? Well, who killed your mother and all your friends and loved ones. It's Barney, the rebel pilot who has gone along with them for this mission. And apparently, again, this must be another thing that's revealed in the annual issue. He was one of Flint's friends back before their world was trashed by the Empire. And sort of he's the one that finally manages to break through to Flint. It makes him understand what he's become and that he's basically on the wrong side here. And this causes Flint to basically turn against the Empire, though at the cost of his own life. And once again, we have sort of a downer ending, as Villa also dies as well, and she sort of dies lamenting that she never got to find out what her own goals and aspirations were. In the end, she died only knowing what her brother wanted. And again, well, the story is not as well handled as I would have liked it to be. It is at least good enough that you do feel genuine sympathy for the character of Villa at the end. I think they could have gotten a lot more out of this if they had if the story had been either better paced or had extra chapters to explore this theme. Because this is a pretty fascinating idea, and I've seen a couple of stories where they do this, where one character has to assume the identity of someone else in order to fight the good fight, but ends up sort of losing their own sense of self in the process because they're practically enslaved to the role they have to play. Let's see now. But yeah, most of these mostly loosely, but they're sort of they do give a kind of weird happy ending for Villa of sorts at the end, because it shows her being reunited with her brother, the real Denon, in death, and apparently Denon literally says, "Here is the man who will teach us," and he's leading her towards Yoda. So I guess apparently you can learn the ways of the Force even in death, which is kind of weird. But then again, hey, it's a Star Wars has never been all that consistent on how the concept of what it's stop talking ahead of myself. Star Wars has never been all that consistent on what its conception of an afterlife is. Yes. So I'm not going to be too hard on it for that sort of thing, even though it does seem a little silly on face value. Okay. Now on to issue number 93. And once again, it's a one-off, but this time it's a pretty interesting one. And this one is actually a single issue storyline, but it's actually handled pretty well considering the kind of subject matter it is. It's sort of an intrigue plot, and it goes into the idea of how people can be played off against one another. So a ship crash manages to make contact with the rebel leadership. Yep, and hang on. And basically, they're these cat aliens, and they're sort of aliens. And this one pilot who managed to make it safely to the rebel leadership informs them of how the Empire has found this, or is destroying her fellow rebels on their world, constantly killing them by stealth in the night. Of course, the others are our heroes are perplexed by this. The Empire's been beat. How can eat? But of course, that doesn't mean that they can't still be up to mischief in the galaxy. And so they basically fly off to where... let me look up the name of the place. Yeah, hang on. Yeah, for what there's basically Han, Leia, and Luke are doing another mission of diplomacy on this backwater world when they see a ship going down, and that's where they find the Catwoman pilot, who tells them about the Empire somehow killing her people. And so they decide to investigate it. Let me first... God damn it! I gotta look up the Catwoman's name. Minka. That's it. And basically, they decide to investigate the matter. They do meet a few of her colleagues. Sammy is a male, and another named Dern, who's sort of their head of intelligence for their particular cell. So they end up going to this asteroid elsewhere in the system where the Empire is supposedly based out of. Only when they get there, they find in a weird, interesting and admittedly a very well done twist that it's more of the same cat aliens as Minka. And what's more, the cat aliens seem to think that they are also fighting the Empire, and that their own side is being killed by them. And so initially, when they run into them, the cat aliens assume that this new group of cat aliens just assume that our heroes are the Empire. And at one point, they have this debate over whether or not to torture them. Is the information worth it? And would they not be then acting just as bad as the enemy? But then it turns out, as they're overhearing this, Dern walks in. And it turns out that he has been the one feeding both sides false information, playing them off against one another, convincing each that the other is with the Empire, and killing their own in the night. And he's basically convinced both sides to trust him as their, head of intelligence. So it's kind of messed up in a way. They don't go much into Dern's motivation, and that is kind of the one weak point of this story. Otherwise, the reveal is handled very well, and it's an interesting portrayal of the concept of how people can be played off against one another by opportunists. Again, there's not much to it, but as a story, but what is there is very good, because obviously once Dern is exposed, the two sides agree to stop fighting, and he gets his in the end. And next one, we have issue number 94. And it's kind of this one is sort of a weird one because it's almost played as a comedic story. Because to the backdrop of all the other stuff that our main characters are getting involved in, the Ewoks are almost on the point of declaring war on the Lasbies, those weird little tiny furry children aliens that, when they hit puberty, go full on Hulk mode. And apparently it's because 3PO, during a translation, and because they found apparently the leading Lasby diplomat having sexual indiscretions with the fiancé of this prominent Ewok leader called Tippett. Yeah, it's a very weird thing, and it's almost farcical. how it's sort of played off. It's how it's almost like a joke. These little teddy bear aliens and these two little tiny teddy bear alien races, fighting each other in a war. But obviously it's a problem because it's not going to be a good look for the Alliance if some of their own member races are already at each other's throats over something. It doesn't help that the Lasbees are literally, because again, these are they're immature members of their species, so they're literally children. Whereas the Ewoks are taking this whole, and honestly, they refuse to take the whole thing seriously, unlike the Ewoks. And particularly Tippett, who is determined to avenge himself upon the guy that seduced his bride. It turns out, though, although none of the main characters realize it, is that this is all the doing of Hirog, Admiral Akbar's new aide, this weird, cartoonish-looking cockroach alien, who apparently is a secret agent for a race of similar cockroach aliens called the Hiromi, who believe it is their destiny to rule the galaxy. Again, this whole chapter is clearly they're aiming for comedy, but I don't know, there's just something about it that while it is farcical, it's not entertainingly farcical. So I can't really say that it succeeds in its goal of being a funny story. And there's really not much else to it. He does it. Hirog prepares like a bomb to go off to try and kill a bunch of the Alliance leadership. But of course, he does it in this idiot way, like how Tom would always make the traps before Jerry would sabotage them. I mean, he's literally literally like a Looney Tunes antagonist. Yes, you just cannot take him seriously. Hey. Lando, for example, meanwhile, Lando's trying to salvage the situation between the Ewoks and the Lasbees by talking Tippett into changing the conflict from war to merely a one-on-one duel between him and the Lasbee diplomat, who was caught doing the thing with his girlfriend. And it's right about the time that they're about to do this where Han, basically, because he knows that the Lasbee is so childishly idiotic, he doesn't have a chance against Tippett, who is clearly going to kill him, that he hands the Lasbee his blaster. But, again, the Lasbee is an idiot, and he just shoots randomly. And one of the shots, by pure luck, hits Hirog's bomb. So that the detonator's all screwy, and so he ends up having to, he jumps out of the bushes yelling, "Oh my god, there's a bomb!" Everybody has to run away before it goes off. However, it does, the fight, and then of course, Tippett's still after him, but then, I guess fear counts as being similar to being aroused, because the Lasbee diplomat undergoes puberty and hulks out, and basically scares everybody else away for a while. But afterwards, apparently, because of the bomb scare, everybody sort of makes up after that. It's very inconsistent, very weird. The art is also kind of slipping. I forget exactly who they got as the artist for this, but his quality is definitely less than that of a lot of the previous ones. And it's not very good, frankly. Not very good at all. So there really isn't much to say about this one. And it's kind of almost like a nothing plot, but it isn't in a way, because the Hiromi actually do appear later in the comic series. So it's again just not. It's technically supposed to be an introduction for them. It's just not a very well handled introduction. But now things get interesting and a lot more serious with Chapter 95 and the return of Lady Lumia, the cyborg from Chapter 88. We also finally get some follow-up on Knife and his people, who are called the Nagai. And apparently at least according to Wikipedia, the big inspiration for them was that the artist, I can't recall the name off the top of my head. Let me look that up. But anyway, she was inspired to do this by apparently by reading a Japanese vampire comic. Let me see what the name was. Mary Jo Duffy and Cynthia Martin. And Duffy was the writer. Cynthia was the artist. And Cynthia Martin's idea was that she looked at anime and drew inspiration from an unnamed Japanese comic about a tragic vampire. So if it's I'm not sure if it's Vampire Hunter D or not, but that would be interesting if it was. But anyway, the Empire, the Nagai Empire, is basically, they don't exactly make it clear where their origins are. In the comic, they sort of make the Nagai out to be from, like, this outside, to be an extragalactic species like the Yuzan Vong. And that they're this little dwarf galaxy called Fire Fist, which is kind of odd, but anyway. And but later, this sort of the Nagai are kind of retconned into being from the unknown regions, because like anyone who's looked at a Star Wars official map knows that pretty much only half of the galaxy is actually like known to stellar cartographers in Star Wars. Of course. So anyway, yeah, Lumia is allied with the Nagai, and also the Imperial Remnant is allied with them as well, simply as a way to get revenge on the rebels for, overthrowing them from... And the way that the Nagai are often... and we meet sort of the other significant Nagai character, Den. And he's very much a... How to summarize Den? He's almost like the PG version of a Dark Eldar from Warhammer in his personality. And he's kind of like the main, and apart from Knife, who does appear a bit later, he is the main ambassador for his race, as is like the main representative of his race in this comic series. The rest are just foot soldiers. And they basically look like goth punk, and they're goth. I think of them as goth punk aliens because they have they're very pale and they wear black goth punk looking outfits and hairstyles. But like I said, Den is kind of like a PG rated Dark Eldar in that obviously he's clearly a sadist and who loves to torment people. But of course, we never actually see him do anything that would and actually do it because that's going a bit too far, or one might argue. So we never actually see him going full homunculus on a victim. But he will also but the thing about why I say Dark Eldar is not only is he like a sadist, but there are these points where he just like monologues, very lyrical about things, about beauty, about sophistication, and about how curious he is about the races of this galaxy. And I don't know, but that definitely gave him a very Dark Eldar vibe, at least in my opinion. But of course, while Den is acting for the interests of his empire to take over the galaxy, Lumia is only interested in one thing, Luke Skywalker, and we're about to find out why. Once again, we have Leia set up to go on another diplomatic mission, but much to her horror, she ends up being accompanied by as her attaché, because that's what they call it, a quartet of male Zeltrons. Let me just quickly look up their names. Yeah, you're gonna love this. They're spelled funny, but they're Bob, John, Maruk, and Rahul. So again, it's kind of the Aerith and Bob thing. And basically, they dress us in that, what was considered, what would have been considered, fashionable and trendy and stuff in a very hippie kind of way back in like the 70s and early 80s, but now just looks kind of weird because that's just how fashion is. And they're almost like Leia's personal boy band, in that they sort of no, that's not quite right. They're like fanboys because they've heard all the stories about Leia and her friends, and in a bit of amusingly a good joke, they confuse Han with Lando, which irritates him to no end. And basically, they're figuring basically they're there to help Leia out, precisely. Though it's never exactly made clear how and why Leia needs their help. Though they do turn out to be pretty useful, though not in the way you would expect. Like there's this hilarious scene where it turns out that some of the cargo was swapped out. At the same time that Leia's going on her mission, Luke, along with Danny and Kiro, at this point Rick and Chido have just completely disappeared and we never see them again. And they're off on their own mission to Kintuine because a bunch of rebels that they sent, a rebel scouting patrol they sent there has gone silent, and they're trying to find out what happened to them. Of course, we learn in the very beginning of the chapter that they were all killed, save one, by Lumia and the Nagai. By this point, Danny has completely switched over from Luke to Kiro, and, the Escalonian doesn't seem to mind that, because, most humanoid races do find Zeltrons attractive. But anyway, at one point, it turns out that because it's all 3PO's fault, by the way, somehow the protocol droid mixed up a crate full of cold weather gear that Luke's party was going to need for Kintuine with Leia's dresses. And there's only one, and so Leia's only got one dress left that was the Zeltrons find, that her Zeltron quartet, I should say, found at the very bottom of her bag. But it's old and dirty and stained, and parts of it are actually torn up. And I can't really describe it. You would have to look up and find a picture of it. And again, follow along the comic on the website. But it's basically this weird part where one half of Leia is almost entirely in the nude. And, she's obviously horrifically embarrassed because this is the only thing resembling a decent outfit that she has to wear for this diplomatic meeting on Kebre Station. Unfortunately, it turns out that this diplomatic meeting was a ruse because Knife and the Nagai are there. And basically, they've already captured the other diplomats, and the whole thing was just a way to lure Leia and Han there. Well, and any other useful Alliance leaders that they could capture and interrogate. Apparently, the Nagai believe very much in learning what you can about the enemy before you fight them. And so, they want to pump everybody for useful information. But luckily, here's the moment where the Zeltron quartet, show their merit. They're not just good looking, they are physically fit and pretty good fighters in one-on-one combat. And they actually managed to help Leia and Han escape from the prison cell they're thrown into, and even capture Knife and the other Nagai, so that they can now be taken back to the Alliance headquarters for interrogation. However, meanwhile, back on Kintuine, while all this is going on, because the storyline sort of intercuts between the two plot lines, things do not go well for Luke and co. Danny is captured. Kiro is left for dead. And Luke is subdued and captured by Lady Lumia, who uses a weird energy whip. Well, it's half energy whip, half physical weapon. And in fact, Lumia explains in the next chapter that because Luke had been trained to use a lightsaber against energy weapons like other lightsabers and blaster bolts, and he's also familiar with how to deal with solid objects, but he was never trained to deal with both at the same time. And that's how her she calls it a force whip was able to defeat him. Surprisingly, she doesn't kill Luke because she's one of those vengeful types that thinks death is too good for the object of her hatred. She intends for Luke to live in despair. And so she's basically going to keep him in the cell and I guess find all kinds of inventive ways to torment him. Meanwhile, Den decides to basically perform, again, PG-rated, the PG version of Dark Eldar experimentation on Danny. Because he wants to sort of understand and Zeltrons as one of the races that his people will have to fight against to conquer the galaxy. And the way they set it up is that she's put in restraints and then she's bombarded by these laser beams that are kind of like the equivalent of non-lethal blaster bolts, that are supposed to scan her for all kinds of physiological information and stuff. It's never really properly explained, but again, it really does give me a feel like the Nagai are PG Dark Eldar. I will say though, Den is a very well done villain. And though on both his look and the way that his dialogue is written, he really does. Again, it really does scream Dark Eldar, the sort of the sadistic sophisticate sort of. That's kind of what kind of personality he has, and that like I said, as someone who's very familiar with Warhammer, it's the sort of thing that just screams Dark Eldar to me. Luckily for both Danny and Luke, Kiro is not dead. He recovers enough that he's able to sneak into the Nagai base and free both of them. Well, actually, wait, no. First he frees Luke. Danny comes later, because after he frees Luke, they confront Lumia. And this time, though, Luke is ready for her. And I don't think they fully explain this part, because he seems that Luke's has had a second lightsaber all this time. And he just pulls it out, and apparently the two weapons, one to fight the physical strands of the Force Whip, the other to fend off the energy strands of the Force Whip, allows him to finally counter Lumia's weapon and subdue her. And he then at one point strips off part of her armor with a lightsaber strike to reveal that she is in fact Shira Bree, the Imperial agent that went undercover as part of the rebellion, and at one point tried to kill and or discredit Luke, only to be shot down by Luke himself during a mission when he didn't before. And of course, this is before he knew she was with the Empire. And I will say that's still one of the better moments of this series that still holds up after all these decades. The fact that they were willing to go that far with the idea of making the audience, even for a moment, briefly question Luke and the Force, because the Force is often, especially the light side at least, is portrayed as benevolent, and Luke is sort of the moral paragon of the series. He's the one that everybody identifies with the most, and having him possibly kill one of his own side, however unintentionally, was definitely a ballsy move on their part. But anyway, it at least explains why Lumia is so hell-bent on destroying Luke, why she hates him so much. Because, the Empire is gone, so so the cause that she served is dead. And what's more, Or she resents the fact that she's now a cyborg, kind of like Vader or the bounty hunter Valance earlier in the comic. She calls herself a shell of a woman kept alive only by her cybernetics. Next. Of course, Luke doesn't have too much time to appreciate his victory over Lumia, because by now the rest of the main Nagai fleet has arrived on Kintuine, and they've brought Imperial stormtroopers with them as allies, because the Empire wants to get back at the rebels for defeating them. Give me a moment. So, of course, now Luke and Kiro have to rescue Danny, all the while avoiding getting caught by the Nagai and their their reinforcements. They do manage to save Danny, luckily. Though, of course, before they go off to save her, they sort of leave Lumia tied up to the boarding ramp, I should say, of the ship that they use to transport themselves to Kintuine. Basically, as a way of making sure that she doesn't escape anywhere. And Lumia at this point is thoroughly consumed with hatred. She basically keeps cursing them even as they leave her where she is. So anyway, meanwhile, by now after interrogating Knife and his friends back on Kebre, the Alliance is now fully aware of the fact that the Nagai are coming, that it's going to be another large-scale war, just like their struggle against the Empire. So now they're sort of rallying the fleet to get ready to do what has to be done again. Because, this is sort of one of the things that I do agree with. As much as I love the expanded universe, one criticism of it that I always did agree with is that they really Lucasfilm could never quite tear itself away from the Skywalker saga and the main cast from the original trilogy era. This is kind of they just kept lingering on this, and it almost feels like every other week there's another threat to the free galaxy that our heroes have to save the day from again, and it does get very wearying. You do kind of wish that they had moved on to other things, and other time periods have other heroes have the spotlight. Because even when they did a Legacy, where they sort of advanced the timeline to the point where everybody is dead. Everyone from the original trilogy is dead. The main protagonist is still a descendant of Luke Skywalker. So even then, they could never quite bring themselves to completely abandon the Skywalker saga. But anyway, our heroes free Danny. Unfortunately, Den manages to catch up to them, and he and Kiro are locked in a hand-to-hand fight. Neat. And Luke is busy dealing with stormtroopers at the time, so he's unable to help him. And unfortunately, there's a scene where they show a slick of blood coloring the water, and so Danny collapses in despair because it seems that she's not just attracted to Kiro, she really loves him. And now it looks like he's gone, and especially it seems when they get back to the ship, they find that Den at least survived because Lumia is missing. So definitely a bit of a downer note for this one. They do there are quite a few downer endings at this stage in the storyline. Let's see. Okay, the next two issues we're sort of taking a break from the Nagai, from the war with the Nagai. And again, this is sort of one of those things where it's not clear where in the chronology this is. But anyway, that's sort of what the last two chapters I'm going to be covering this stream are. They're these, once again, one-off stories, and this time they're not even really connected to advancing the storyline, either in the case... all we know is that it is post-Endor, and they both mostly revolve around Han. So in the first one, Lando basically talks Han into going on a diplomatic mission again. Now, Han, at this point, is kind of fed up with all the paperwork and responsibility that comes with his official position as a general in the Alliance. But anyway, Lando basically ropes him into it by appealing to Han's ego, basically saying, hey, you old pirate, you're basically the best man for the job. And, you know, Han does have an ego that is very, very easy to stroke. Okay. Let's see, now where exactly is he going again? Okay, so apparently there's this world called Vandalhelm, and basically it's renowned for having the best starship rights in the galaxy. They've got all these amazing, all the right metal ores to make ships from in immense quantities. And obviously the rebels, the Alliance, I should say, because I keep getting that mixed up for some reason, they would very much like that state of affairs to continue. However, it seems that the Vanderhelmites, for lack of any better term, are a superstitious bunch. And they venerate these beings called the... darn it, what are they called? Well, they're not beings, but they're specifically... from this old family lineage that were like the descendants of the people who first settled that planet. What are they? They're called the Venerated Ones. That's it. And apparently the last two descendants of the Venerated Ones are this teenage girl and her little kid brother who's barely more than a toddler. But apparently the metalsmiths of Vanderhelm are very superstitious, and they practically venerate, they've worshipped the Venerated Ones, and they somehow believe that without them to perform the appropriate rituals, their craft will not be able to make good products or good ships. So the rebels figure, hey, we found these people. Let's give them their Venerated Ones, their silly superstition, and they'll be inclined to favor us and be friendly with us, because we always are in need of ships. Yes. Of course, Han discovers only when he gets there that he's basically going to be babysitting these two on their way back to Vanderhelm, and he's not happy about it. He basically says that he'll kill Lando the next time he sees him. And the Venerated Ones, they're both these pretty spoiled old rich kids, essentially. And so, whenever Han has to do some fancy flying because they were trying to dodge trouble, they mostly treat it like it's a game. Of course, eventually they do manage to finally get to Vanderhelm, where they meet the head of the metalsmithing guild, Oruk. It turns out, though, that unlike most of the metalsmiths of Vanderhelm, he doesn't put any stock in the superstition regarding the Venerated Ones, and in fact, since the Empire, since the Empire days, he sort of had this quiet arrangement with them, where basically he gets to be in charge of everything. And he would like it to stay that way. You know, bringing the venerated ones back kind of puts a crimp in his plans for long-term political dominance. And so he basically finds because there are still some Imperials in the vicinity of Vanderhelm. And so what this guy Oruk does is he basically tries to kidnap the venerated ones. He can't have them killed because there would be no way to cover it up, and his people would tear him. His own people would tear him to pieces if he turned out to be responsible. But he basically intends to capture and basically send them off into exile somewhere on some dinky little world where they will never be found again. But luckily, even though Chewbacca's not present, he's catching up with his family. Han has Nien Numba the Sullustan along with him, and they do manage to stop Oruk, and they literally send him falling off over the edge of the platform. And that's pretty much it. The Empire is forced to pull out. Vanderhelm is firmly on the side of the Alliance since they've returned their venerated ones safely to them. And, all's well as all that ends well. Oh. And now we go into the last one off before I end the stream. And this one, I do not particularly like this chapter because they do something where they kind of push Han's character to almost a kind of breaking point, where he's acting out of character. Especially since this is a post-Endor Han Solo. Oh, and even though Han was never really a big believer in the cause of the rebellion, he does sort of... the way that I'd like to think of it is that... The way I can best describe it is that Han is loyal to people, not causes. He stuck with the rebellion because he felt loyalty not to the rebellion, but to Luke and Leia. And so... For him, it's people that matter to him, not ideals. And that's so we sort of are now catching up in the aftermath of the escape from Kintuine. Both Luke and Danny are kind of coming to terms with Kiro's death. Danny in particular is devastated. Luke again feels regret for the fact that he kept denying Kiro the chance to learn the Jedi ways. Maybe if he had learned a few things, it might have saved him in his duel to the death with Den, the Nagai. Hold on. Meanwhile, though, the wider galaxy must move on, and we are introduced completely out of the blue to another character, though apparently, for whatever reason, it's out of order. His name is Bay. He's a Corellian, though they call him a half-breed, so I guess he's like half-alien something. Apparently he's an old friend of Han, but we don't learn how they meet until the very next chapter, chapter 100. So I don't know why exactly they did this out of order, but, they decided to do it that way. And apparently what the issue is that there's this planet called, darn it. What is the name of this blasted planet? I can never keep track of all these planets in the comic series. Sorry, guys. I want to make sure I'm getting this right. 99. Okay, the planet is Godo. That's it. And apparently there's this weird virus that's just killing everybody. And Han basically, along with Lando, are going to try and help them find a cure to see if anything can be done. So they come to the planet. It's practically a ghost town because everybody's either dead or in quarantine. So, fun times, I'm sure. They do find, however, that the Godoans, who kind of look like Mantis from Guardians of the Galaxy for the most part, venerate this giant computer that they think is a god. Well, a goddess specifically. And after some examination, Han quickly realizes that this powerful ancient computer is what maintains Godo's, what makes Godo livable. What has kept the people safe and healthy all this time. And so as the machine is finally starting to fail because parts of it are missing, I mean, this is why the Godoans are succumbing to this disease. And it turns out that the missing parts are those two art statues that were mentioned back in earlier chapters and in earlier streams of this series, the minstrel and the goddess. It turns out that these aren't just artworks, they're key components, very esoteric key components of the mechanism. And so they know where the minstrel is because it's with those that criminal gang that Lando and Chewie tried to use to try and find Han back when he was still in Carbonite. And the other is with Drebel, that guy that Lando sort of tried to screw over by using his name whenever he was doing stuff that might get him in trouble with the Empire, only for him to be declared a hero of the rebellion and get all the credit for the stuff Lando did. The minstrel is relatively easy to recover. They find the criminals in jail and basically say, "Hey, we'll let you out. We'll even pay you because we'll basically pay that. We'll bribe we'll bribe the prison authorities to let you out, and we'll even give you money if you give us the minstrel, tell us where you squirreled away the minstrel before you were arrested." And so, very grudgingly, they agree to this. Meanwhile, Lando finds Drebel and basically tells him that, look, these people are dying. We kind of need the statue that I gave you as a supposed award for your commendation as a hero of the Alliance. But it seems Drebel has turned over a new leaf and he doesn't really need any persuading much beyond that. And, he goes on this sort of out of the blue spiel about, how I basically, he's turned over a new leaf. He's realized, it's great. That I've now realized that I was just this selfish guy and that now I now discovered a more noble aspiration and how, people appreciate me more since I've become a hero of the rebellion. And so, yes, I will, willingly give up the statue of the goddess. And, it's not well handled. It's completely out of the blue. But, it's not a terrible moment. It's just not well handled. Lando is surprised and touched by Drebel's selflessness here, though. And, it's not a bad scene. It's just not as well handled as it could have been. And meanwhile, sort of on the subject of Bay, Han's old friend that we don't really get a proper introduction to until later. He's basically this big guy. He's like the size of a Wookiee, but he has white hair and an eye patch. And he doesn't really do much in this chapter, because again, they don't really introduce him properly until chapter 100, which like chapter 50 is like a special double-length issue. And that will be covered in the next and hopefully the final stream. But at any rate, they return the minstrel and the goddess to the divine computer thing, and everything starts to recover. So it seems that all is right with the world. And then we get to the part that I really do not like about this storyline. Right as they're leaving, Lando starts to come down with the illness because apparently he neglected to undergo the sterilization and sanitation procedures that Han and Bay did before setting foot on Godo. And so there's the Alliance sent like a small fleet to try and help out. So Akbar is there, Wedge is there. A lot of rebel pilots and star captains are there. And this is the part that I really dislike. Han basically threatens to have the rebels fire on Godo and destroy the capital city and possibly even the computer if the Godoans will not let them in to let Lando enter the temple precinct to be healed. Because once the computer was restored, the Godoan leaders decided that in order to make sure that parts of it don't go missing again, they decide to completely bar the temple to outsiders. They just won't let Lando in, and that's where Han threatens to fire on the world. And I do not like this. I mean, Han is mercenary, and again, as I said earlier, his loyalty is to people, not to ideals. But still, this is beyond the pale. This would be beyond the pale for him. Ransoming, essentially threatening to level an entire world, well, even for Lando's sake. But of course, eventually they capitulate. They at last, because Han does make the point that Lando, went out of his way to and even risked his life in the cause of helping them get the statues back. Because he went on that planet, he now has contracted the virus. And the only way to be cured is if he goes inside the temple. But again, I just cannot believe that Han would actually do that. Never mind actually go through with it, actually threaten people in this way. And of course, they try to play it off, and at the end where it's like, Lando asks, would you really have done that? Shot up the planet for me? Han says, well, the good thing is we'll never have to find out. And it's like, I do not like that. I do not like this. This does not feel like... Maybe if this were Han pre A New Hope, maybe. Because, he was so much more cynical and mercenary. But I just don't believe that Han... Even then, you'd be hard-pressed to... You have to really work hard to persuade me that even that Han would be the kind of person that would threaten to basically commit essentially a kind of genocide by killing so many people and destroying what's left of their civilization just to and that he would blackmail them this way. I just have a hard time believing that he would really do that. But that is the end of chapter 99, and I'll see you guys on Saturday, hopefully, unless something comes up, for the final dozen or so chapters of Marvel Star Wars 1977. It's been a really bizarre ride thus far, and I am partially glad that it's going to be over soon because there's only because this is such a lengthy series, but it's also interesting to find all these things that the kind of weird directions that they sort of went with Star Wars in those early formative years, as it were. And how there were certain elements, like, for example, Lady Lumia, that the expanded universe would later sort of retcon and bring back. So it's definitely interesting to sort of look at this time capsule of Star Wars history, because that's how I view this comic series. There's a lot of it. There's too much of it that's contradicted. That's either not good or contradicted by much better Star Wars stories for it to really be considered canon anymore, even pre-Disney. But it is overall an enjoyable time capsule of sort of what Star Wars was like in those very early formative years, because this comic series outlasted the original films. When we get to the final issue, it will be 1986 when the last one came out. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this as much as I have. Sorry that I'm not quite as coherent in the streams as I am in my regular videos. Clearly I need to work on this. But this has given me a lot of practice, and I hope you guys have been willing to... I'm grateful to you guys for indulging me in this. I hope you, I hope you've all had a Merry Christmas, and hopefully you guys will have a Happy New Year as well.